Hey, what is up, you guys, and welcome to the first video edition of the Girl on the Grid podcast, which I have now changed the name of to the Aussie Grid Girl because there was already a Girls on the Grid podcast, and I don't want people looking for that and finding me instead, because I would never want to pull focus away from somebody else that's doing what they're doing. So we have changed it, and I am now the Aussie Girl on the Aussie Girl on the Grid, which to me makes more sense anyway because I am Aussie. And I am a girl, in case you hadn't noticed. Couple of things you guys should know about me to start off with. My name is Kelsey. I am older than 75% of the grid. Congratulations if you guessed that, or if that's a surprise to you. Ta-da! I'm older than 75% of the grid. If you can guess the 6 drivers that are older than me, bonus points to you, because I'm not going to say how old I am. And some things that you guys should know about me is that I badly play the bass guitar. That's what you can see in the background here. You can also see, if my head wasn't in the way, this lovely Ferrari flag that is stuck up with sellotape because we are big budget here. Underneath that, you can also see my German flag, which I have had for a very long time. And underneath that flag is the pansexual pride flag. I really need to find more places to hang things in my apartment. You can also see one of the many fake plants that lives in my apartment. There is many of these. And you can also see this lovely bottle of red wine and my Draco Malfoy Harry Potter one from when I went to Universal Studios in Florida last year. You can also see a bookcase. There's too many bookcases in my apartment. There's so many books and vinyl records that litter this place. And there's not nearly enough Formula One merch in my house. I have a bunch of different Formula One team t-shirts, which I'm going to get into that in a second. And I've got a couple of other little bits and pieces. I've got a beanie, which I kind of lost to my cat because it's got a bubble on the end of it and she's obsessed with it. So I had to steal it off her so I could wear it to the Grand Prix when I went in Australia a couple weeks ago, which again, I'm going to get to that shortly. And I've got a McLaren hat too. So there's a few of the things that I have. Now, getting to the couple of team shirts that I have. So at the Australian Grand Prix, which I will talk about properly in the second half of this, but I'm going to talk about something else first. In the first half of this podcast, we're going to talk about Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And then in the second half, we're going to talk about Australia. And then we'll go from there and see what else we can come up with. But basically, I bought a Ferrari shirt and a Haas shirt because I figured that it would be cheaper to save on postage to actually buy them at the Grand Prix. And I was really disappointed with the Haas merch because it does not have the boys' names or numbers on the back, whereas I have a Charles Leclerc shirt. I also bought a Lando Norris shirt last year and a Sebastian Vettel Aston Martin shirt last year. Again, it is so much easier to buy merchandise at the actual Grand Prix than buy it from the official stores and get it shipped to Australia, because if you are in Australia, you know how terrible shipping is in this country. And if you're not in Australia, let me just say that if you live in America and you want to post me something, you have to allow at least a month before it's actually going to arrive. And from the UK, it's usually about 2 weeks. Anywhere else in the world, I'm not entirely sure, but I know that when I order stuff from the Rammstein store in Germany, it's based in Berlin, I get that in 10 days, but that's because FedEx is great, at least from my point of view of getting stuff delivered. But yeah, also something else you guys don't know about me is that I have the AMR 21 Sebastian's car tattooed on my ribs, which I will I'll actually take a photo of, and hopefully my lovely editor Trent will put a photo of that here. If not, I just did this and looked like an idiot, but that's fine. I don't mind. I'm happy to look like an idiot. So what we're going to do first is we're going to talk about the first 2 Grand Prix of the season. We're going to talk about the Bahrain Grand Prix, the opening race, and then we are going to talk about Jeddah, the second race of the season, and then we are going to talk about Australia as its little separate entity because I was there, so I have a little bit more that I can say about it. Also, one other thing, probably the last thing that I'm going to tell you guys about myself is I have a unhealthy obsession with coffee. It's really a problem, but you just have to accept it. I'm sorry, guys. Coffee is good, and it makes me happy. I drink way too much of it, which is probably why I don't sleep, but we're not talking about me. Anyway, I'm just going to get my notes app on my phone because, now, I didn't actually watch the Jeddah Grand Prix live because I was at My Chemical Romance, which was the best night of my life. And then I got a really bad chest infection, and then I got really, really sick, which is why I'm only just recording this podcast now when we are 3 Grand Prix into the season. I'm really sorry. They're going to be a lot more regular from now on. I'm going to try and get them up by the Friday after the race before. When they're triple or double headers, I might wait until they're all done and then do like a big recap video. But basically, when I was watching Bahrain, I took notes, you guys. I took notes. There's some notes here, so I'm going to use those to go off. First up, qualifying was, it was really exciting to see all of these cars on the road, and I don't think anyone was prepared for how fast the Aston Martins were going to be. I don't know what they've done with the AMR 22, and let's be honest, I'm really upset that they didn't have this car last year because I would have loved to have seen Seb do well. However, it is really nice to see Lance, and more specifically Fernando, doing brilliantly in this brand new car. I don't think anybody was expecting them to be as fast as they were. I know I definitely wasn't expecting them to be as fast as they were. I was kind of expecting it to be what it was last year. I was expecting to see Red Bull and Ferrari at the top with McLaren and Mercedes close behind them. And then the rest of the field pretty much in the same spots as they were last year. However, we clearly got some surprising things from the first race of the season, which was the Aston Martins doing really, really well. Unfortunately, the McLarens aren't doing so hot right now. I mean, Australia was better, but let's be honest, they're not doing as well as they did last year. Daniel laughs in Daniel Ricciardo. And the Mercedes, we're clearly seeing that they're having problems with their cars already. At the Australian Grand Prix, those that saw, I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, George's car was on fire, so we know that that's, not doing too great. But personally, as someone who has been a Nico Hülkenberg fan since when did he start? Since way back in the day, it was nice to see the Haas cars doing quite well, and Nico started qualified in the top 10. So, however, qualifying in the top 10 is about as good as his race was, because at the start of the race, as we all know, he didn't really have a good start and ended up driving the entire race with a damaged front wing, and it affected the performance of the car so much that there was no way in hell he was ever going to finish inside the top 10 with the damage that he had, which is really unfortunate because, as I said, I would have loved to have seen what he could do in that first race if he could convert qualifying to the performance in the race, which I think kind of that's what everybody was expecting. Is they were like, okay, cool, a Haas qualified, high up in the top 10, but they're probably not going to do so well for the rest of the race, which, unfortunately, that is what ended up happening. Not through any fault of Nico's. You can't really help when your car is damaged because it's something you can't control. And speaking of something that you can't control, let's talk about the start of Bahrain and that little touch there between the two Aston Martins. I think we all heard the Fernando radio message. Someone hit me. I'm not sure who it was. I would love to have been a fly on the wall in that garage after the race when they told him that it was Lance that hit him. I don't quite think that Lance and Fernando having a little prang like that is going to be ever as bad as anything we've seen with other rivalries, such as issues between Daniel and Max at the start. Obviously, there's the historic, there's all of the stuff that happened between Lewis and Nico. I think it's just one of those things where it was a racing incident. Points to you if you understand that reference. It was just a racing incident, but I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to see what they had to say about that one. The next point that I made, I love this panel. I love this note. It kind of didn't look like they were racing for a little while just because they were running so close together. I think with all of the budget caps and the development and the technology, everything, they're able to follow so much closer, and all of the cars are kind of performing at such a high level that it doesn't really look like they're racing at times just because they are so close together. And obviously, when you have that kind of racing, there's nothing bad about it. I think it's good that we're finally seeing a field that is so clumped together and so close. Obviously, it increases the chances of accidents happening, but I think personally it's great for the sport to see everyone performing so well. I've also made a little note here, which says George versus Lewis, which I'm not too sure what that means. I don't remember what I was talking about. This is what happens when I don't record the episode straight after the race. It might have been when George was George was having to defend from Lewis, which, you know, Lewis is always going to be the number one driver whilst he is at Mercedes, and that's never going to change. I think George still has a lot of room to grow. Like, he's, you know, for someone his age, he's performing incredibly well, and he's obviously working really, really hard. But I do think that he does kind of need a little bit longer, in the Mercedes anyway, to kind of get his head around everything, especially when those cars still aren't doing too crash hot. They are kind of improving, but it's probably going to be a little while down the track before we see some real, like, improvements and changes. And oh my god. So I've written on here about 3 or 4 times, Ocon penalty. Let's just talk about the absolute mess that was Esteban Ocon's race in Bahrain. He had a penalty, a pit box penalty. He had another 10-second penalty added because he didn't serve his penalty right the first time. I think there was another late penalty that he got for, he might have been speeding in pit lane, but there was a lot. Poor Esteban. He was not having a good time. You know, it was his kind of first race as number one driver for Alpine now that Fernando has moved over to Aston Martin and Pierre is over there, but it was just... it was just really upsetting. Like, I kind of was like, oh no, poor Esteban. The absolute class that was going on during the race between Alonso and Lewis, like, oh my god. It was so good to see 2 veterans of the sport that are just doing so, like, I'm not the biggest Lewis Hamilton fan. I've always been very open about that. There's no particular reason why I don't like him. He's just not a driver that I've, ever been like, oh yeah, I really like him. It's just a personal preference thing. Please don't come after me. I know what people are going to say in the comments and know what you're thinking. That's not true. I just not his biggest fan, and that's fine. Like, you're allowed to have opinions, right? We're allowed to have opinions. Although, according to Christian Horner, sorry, Christian, we, as females, only have opinions on Formula 1 because we think the drivers are attractive. But that is something that I'm going to talk about in a minute as well, because that deserves its whole own segment. But anyway, I don't know if you guys can see this. It literally says Leclerc, no, with like a million O's. Look, we all really thought that last year was going to be Leclerc's year. Well, I thought so anyway. Obviously, Max was always going to do well, but after he had his DNF in the first round and his DNF in Australia, which, weirdly, Charles is kind of following the same path. But anyway, Ferrari need to get their shit together. Like, I thought that with Mattia being replaced by Fred Vassar, I love Fred. Like, I think he's very funny. But being funny while you're on camera and then not doing your job behind the scenes, like, I understand that he's the new team principal and he's the new guy in town, and there's been a lot of staff changeover at Ferrari as well as a bunch of other teams as well. But when you come into a team and both of your cars don't even finish the first race of the season, it doesn't look good, especially when it's a technical error and it's something that the drivers can't control. Like, there was nothing that Charles could have done about that. And as the opening race of the season, you expect that, you're going to have your Ferrari and your Red Bull and potentially 2 Red Bulls or 2 Ferraris and a Red Bull on the podium. You're not really expecting Alonso to come out of nowhere. And you're kind of not expecting Ferrari to just completely screw the pooch. And the whole season really has been a bit of a wash so far for Ferrari. I'm hoping that this month-long break in between races, which we're 2 weeks into this month-long break, we've got 2 weeks to go before Baku. I really hope that they can kind of sort something out and kind of work out what is going on with the car, and they can fix it and give Charles and Carlos something that is reliable. But let's not hold our breath because I don't really see it happening. for Aston Martin, it's a huge improvement on last year. They were back markers most of last year. They weren't ever really in it. And so far, 3 races in, they have been so impressive. Like, there is nothing bad about what is going on at Aston Martin at the moment. Everything there seems to be going really, really well. I know people say, you know, Aston Martin is not really a proper team because of Lance and because of his dad owning it. But, you know, they've clearly used what they have, and they've been very smart about it. And I think Checo made quite a nice little joke in the press conference after the race, saying that it was nice to see 3 Red Bull cars on the podiums, because as you can see, if you look back at the technical side of things from the end of last year and into this year, the side pods on the Aston Martin are virtually the same as the side pods on the Red Bull. I believe there's some communication going on there between like staff members. Nothing I can prove, of course. But I think it was a good joke, and, you know, they did make their point. They are quite similar, but I guess in this day and age of Formula One, these are sorts of things that we're going to keep seeing a lot of. We were kind of... You expect a lot from the rookies in their first race of the season. And look, I know it wasn't Oscar Piastri's fault that his car shat itself, but on the other side of that, in terms of performance, Nick de Vries was just really... There was just nothing remarkable about it. And after him filling in last year in the Williams when Alex had his appendix out, you'd think that he'd come into it and do this amazing performance, and he just didn't. And so far, like the first 3 races as a whole, not just the first race, it's been largely unremarkable. And that cuts me up inside, you know, because you want to see competitiveness. You want to see the rookies like smashing it out of the park and proving why they have the opportunities that they have. And in saying that, a lot of people were upset about Nico Hülkenberg coming back to Haas and them dropping Mick Schumacher. And recently Toto's come out and said some really stupid stuff. But let's be honest, Toto loves the controversy as much as he doesn't say that he does. He does. And he's come out and said some stuff about Mick and the way that he was treated at Haas. But let's be honest, the kid was underperforming. I love Mick Schumacher. I love Michael Schumacher. I've loved Michael Schumacher since I was a teenager. And it's just, you wouldn't keep someone in your team that is costing you millions of dollars every year. Like, it's just recently come out that Mick caused $2 million worth of damage to his cars last year. And he didn't perform. There was a few races where he did quite well, but overall it was just, there was just nothing in it. Like, it wasn't worth keeping him in that car when he just wasn't performing. Like, you cannot honestly say that you would keep a financial liability in your team and you would keep someone who is constantly underperforming in your team just because of the name that he comes from and the legacy. And, you know, so far, Nico Hülkenberg has kind of proved that he deserves to be where he is and be back in that car, because the first 3 races have been really good for him. Like, quali has been amazing. Like, I'm going to save this conversation for Australia. But basically, he's improved exponentially, and I'm hoping that this year is finally the year that Nico gets a podium. And I do think that the Haas's do have it in them to be on the podium this year, and that's not just me being the queen of wistful thinking. There was a bunch of late pit stops during the race, which I guess did help with that the late red flag with getting, I think it was a late red flag, getting Ocon off the track. I don't know. There was a lot going on in that race. It was quite. I was quite upset for Lando as well. I have been a big Lando Norris fan for the last few years. He kept having to go into the pits in his McLaren, and it was just it sucks. Like, it would be hard being a driver and being in that position where you are constantly having to go into the pits and then out, and then into the pits in a few laps, and then out, and then back into the pits in a few laps. You never want that to happen. And you don't want to, like, as a fan of the sport, not just as a fan of Lando, that's not really something that you want to see. Like, you don't want to see someone struggling so much because of something they can't control. Like, it was his car that was the issue, not his driving. not his performance, and just nothing that he could control, which kind of makes it even worse. Like, I think it is so hard being obviously it's hard being a Formula One driver. There's 20 of them in the world. But when your car is underperforming, and after having such a great year the year before, like, I really do feel for Lando and Leclerc at the moment, because they're both kind of in the same boat. Like, they're both kind of in the same boat here, where they are both very talented drivers, and they're being stuck in these machines that just aren't performing the way that they should be. And, you know, out of the drivers that finished the race, you know, the top 10, I don't think anyone was kind of expecting. But, you know, the top 10 in that race was, I think everyone was kind of expecting Max Verstappen to be at the top, and probably Perez. Weren't expecting Alonso to come third. Sainz being in fourth, like, that was, it was good. I kind of wish that the Ferrari just had that little bit more, and he would have done better. You have Hamilton back in the top 5, which isn't, I'm not a Lewis fan, but it is so nice to see. You got Lance Stroll, George Russell, Valtteri Bottas, and Pierre Gasly, I think, rounded out the top 10. And Alex Albon. So having the Williams in the points for the first round, like, hell yeah, Alex. I'm so glad that we have Alex Albon back. He's such a great driver and just a great personality, and he's so good for the sport because he's so entertaining to watch. And I'm going to end talking about Bahrain with talking about Lance Stroll. Now, Lance had a really bad bike accident, so he missed testing in Bahrain, and Felipe Drugovich, who is the reserve driver, I believe he's also a F3 driver. I could be wrong, but their reserve driver had to jump in for testing because Lance had a really bad accident, broke both of his wrists, his ribs, and his toe. And the fact that he was able to come back and perform in Bahrain and then finish in the top 10, like, that's a hell of a thing to do, to be so injured and in hospital and then coming back and performing the way that he did. Like, wow. I know in quali he was talking about how badly his wrists were hurting, and he did have to get lifted out of the car at one point during the weekend because he just physically couldn't do it himself. You know, you'd think that something like that is probably pretty dangerous, and look, it is. It's dangerous for him to have been in that car. But what are you going to do? Like, unfortunately, shit happens. Luckily, Lance was able to come back and he performed, and good on him. Like, people shit on Lance a lot. And Lance a lot. People shit on Lance. And I get it, okay? Like, Daddy's money owns the team. Daddy's money got him in the seat in the first place. But I think over especially the last 3 years, Lance has proved that he deserves that seat. He deserves to be in that car. And screw anyone that says differently. I'm sorry, but look, I wasn't a fan of him when he first started back in the Force India days when he was driving with Checo Perez because of obviously all of the, like, Daddy's money bought him that seat. And cool, Lawrence Stroll may own Aston Martin, but he's not the one that gets into that car every week. Lance is the one that gets into that car, and he drives. And he drives well. And overall, like, I think he did really bloody well. And yeah, the fact that he came back from that injury and then performed the way that he did, good on him. Props to Lance. Well done, you. Maybe we'll see Lance Stroll on the podium this year. Who knows? The Aston Martins are doing quite well. It would be nice to see. Yeah, as I said, I'm going to kind of, like, skip over the race in... where am I? Oh my god, my brain's just completely gone. I'm going to kind of skip over Jeddah because I did watch it the other day. Like, I tend to watch races the day or so after if I miss them. It did take me a little bit to get back to watch this one because I've been really, really ill. Which again is why it's taken me so long to do this. But I'm back now. And they're going to be a lot more regular. But it was largely unremarkable, Saudi Arabia. Like, I don't agree with them racing there. Like, I really don't think because of political reasons, but I'm not going to turn this into a political debate. I could, but I'm not going to. The most interesting thing about that race was the fact that Max Verstappen came from 15th in qualifying to finish second. Like, dude, good job. And it's not an easy track to pass on. It is a very, very narrow track, as we saw last year with Max crashing into the wall in quali. We had Mick Schumacher's big shunt. Like, it's not the greatest track for overtaking. And the fact that he came from 15th to finish second, good on him. Also pulled fastest lap, which is great. And he did get driver of the day, which, you know, it's nice to see Max getting voted driver of the day because that's something that's voted by the fans. And him being appreciated and respected by fans and having nice things said about him makes me happy because it doesn't always happen. But yeah, it was a largely unremarkable race. At least both the Ferraris managed to finish. Not that they did anything well. It's a damn shame that Charles had to serve a 10-place grid penalty. Like, he still finished 7th, I think he qualified 2nd. So if he had have stayed 2nd on the track without his 10-place grid penalty for replacing his, I think it was his engine or his power unit, possibly both. I think it was the power unit, which you only get 2 of those per season, and he's already used both of them. So let's hope that the Ferrari doesn't decide that it wants to spontaneously combust. And he doesn't have to serve another one. So quali was great. He qualified 2nd, you know, Perez qualified on pole, then went on to win the race. But it was just, it was a largely unremarkable race. That's all I can say about it, is it was a damn shame because, again, Alex Albon, such a great performance in the first race, nothing in the second race, which again, it wasn't his fault. Clearly wasn't his fault. And then Lance's car was also on fire, so that also wasn't his fault. You can't really complain or be blamed for something when it's something that you can't control. And, you know, at least both of the McLarens finished. Oscar Piastri didn't even last half of his first race in an F1 car, so terrible debut for the Australian. And as a fellow Australian, I felt kind of bad for him, but I was also like, he took Daniel Ricciardo's seat, and I like Danny Ricciardo. I'm in the process of buying one of his wines, just as a side note. I just can't decide which one I want. If people like wine, comments, please. Tell me what I should get of Daniel Ricciardo's. And if you've tried Danny Ricciardo's wine, did you enjoy it? That's one for you in the comments. I'm just looking at the finishing grid. So both of the Mercedes were quite up there in Jeddah, and we really thought that was going to carry through to Australia. But we all know about the shit show that was the Australian Grand Prix, don't we? I really know about the shit show that was the Australian Grand Prix because I was there. And before I talk about the Australian Grand Prix, I'm just going to have a little bit of a rant because I feel like this needs to be said. And it upsets me that it needs to be said, but I still deal with so many comments online, mostly from men, not all of them, most of them are men, telling me that my opinion on Formula One is invalid because I'm a female, or that I only watch Formula One because the drivers are attractive. Again, I make the point of the fact that I'm older than 75% of the grid. Me thinking any of those kids are attractive, it's creepy. It's creepy. Like, sure, they're good looking, like classically good looking dudes, most of them, but, you know, who cares? Unless you are someone that watches all the pre-race interviews, watches the post-race interviews, watches goes on YouTube and finds all of the things, and watches all of the challenge videos that the teams do, which, by the way, go and watch all of the Ferrari ones because they're really funny. You see the drivers for 10 seconds during the race? Like, you see their faces? Otherwise, they're covered in this, this massive helmet, the thing that protects their head. So if they have an accident or if, they get debris in their faces or something, they have something that protects them. And their race suits, which, cover them, from neck to feet. And you don't even see most of their bodies during the race. Trust me, majority, I'm not going to say all, because there are some females that like Formula One because the drivers are pretty, and that's fine. You're allowed to have that opinion. I don't know whether people have noticed, but females get shit on for everything that they like. They only you only like Formula One because the drivers are good looking. You only like football because the players are good looking. You only like cricket because the players are good. No! For most females, that doesn't come into our minds. we are not thinking about how attractive the drivers are. And I started watching Formula One in 1997. Showing my age. I started watching Formula One in 1997. I didn't understand the concept of what an attractive dude was. Like, that's not what got me into Formula One. Like, it just blows my mind that this is still a conversation that is being had, that females only like Formula One because the drivers are good looking. Screw you, Christian Horner, for ever saying that, because now that you've perpetuated it, so many people agree with you. A lot of people disagree with you because people like to disagree with you because of who you are and what you like, but the fact that it makes me so mad. Like, it genuinely makes me lividly mad. And, you know, I'm probably screwing myself here because one day I would love to work for a Formula One team. Probably never going to work for Red Bull because of all this shit that I'm saying. But you know what? I don't care. I'd rather not work for someone that's going to perpetuate something like that. I've had my rant. I've said what I needed to say. Most females, again, I'm not going to say all because there are some people that do like Formula One just because the drivers are good looking. And that is okay. You are allowed to like something because people are good looking, believe it or not. Screw what anybody else tells you. This is totally okay for you. Me, personally, and the majority of people I know that are females that enjoy Formula One, we don't like it because the drivers are pretty. The drivers that we barely see over the whole race weekend. I didn't spend the amount of money, which I'm not going to say, I did not spend the amount of money that I spent to go to the Australian Grand Prix for 3 days to look at the drivers because you don't see them. You can't see them. I didn't do the Melbourne walk, which is a thing that Melbourne does where the drivers come in and you can get autographs and stuff. I didn't do that this year. I did it last year. I didn't get anyone's autographs, but it was a cool atmosphere to be around. I didn't do it this year because I was too interested in everything else that was going on. We were very lucky at the Australian Grand Prix where we got the F2s, we got the F3s, we had the F1 and we also had the supercars. I'm a petrol head, so supercars make me so happy. Like, just the way that they sound when they go around the track, and they bump into each other and bump and grind so much more than Formula One cars, which obviously they're actual cars rather than a piece of machinery that is specifically designed for speed and for Formula One. They're cars. I believe the supercars in Australia, we have it's either a Chevy Camaro or it's a Mustang, I think. Don't quote me on that, I could be wrong. But I'm pretty sure the two cars that they drive are either Chevy Camaros or they are Ford Mustangs. I'm pretty sure that's right. There's a lot of different teams, obviously, but there is only two major cars that are used for that. And the F3 was... It's really interesting to see the difference between a Formula 3 car, a Formula 2 car, and a Formula 1 car. Like, they're all vastly different looking machines. And it was so entertaining. You know, personally, I've been to a bunch of Grand Prix. Like, this wasn't my first one. I've been to a fair few. And this was probably the most entertaining one because there was something going on whenever you were, like, around the track. There was something happening through the entire weekend that you could be watching. So on Friday, I just had a general admission ticket, found myself on a hill where I sat last year during the Grand Prix because I didn't have a grandstand, and just watched everything. We got completely drowned on Friday because it rained. If you saw P1 and P2, you would have seen how wet it was. So that was fun. And Saturday was really good. Seeing the sprint of the F2s, like just the different formats, was really interesting. And I made sure that I got there at, I think gates opened at 8:30. And at 9:05 a.m. was the feature race for the Formula 3, which, again, they can follow so much closer and they're smaller, I believe, the Formula 3 cars. I don't think they go as fast. I could be wrong. And the Formula 2 cars. Now, the Formula 2 race was so entertaining. Like, seeing these young drivers that are coming up through the ranks, and that are going to be the next generation of Formula 1 drivers, if people like Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso retire, which I don't want to see that happen. Like, they're two very entertaining drivers for the sport. But when they have these young kids that are coming up, like, some of these young kids are the ones to watch. I kind of feel like I jinxed Charles over the weekend because I made a joke saying at least there's one Leclerc on the podium this weekend because Arthur Leclerc came third in the F2 race, with some great defending at the back end of that race. You really should go and find that race and watch it and just watch the last 10 laps because the last 10 laps were really entertaining. And watching Arthur Leclerc hold off the person that was in fourth, whose name I can't remember, I'm so sorry. It was so entertaining to watch, and I'm really glad that I got to see it. The motor car, the supercars, it was a weird weekend for the supercars because of the wetness, but in every supercar race over the weekend, there was at least one car on fire. Pretty there was at least a car on fire every day. There was an accident in the supercars on the Thursday. I wasn't there, so I didn't see it. On the Friday, one of the car, I believe it was James Courtney's car. I believe it was James Courtney's car. No, it wasn't James Courtney's car. James Courtney's car was the one that caught on fire on Saturday. On Friday, I can't remember whose car it was. Oh my god. I'm going to have to look up the supercar drivers. Just give me 1 second. But like James Courtney's car, again, I will put a link to a YouTube video for that in the description. Holy shit. That's all I have to say, like the way that car caught on fire. Like it was just, wow. It was a fireball, and he was very lucky that he made it back to the pits. And they were able to put the car out. Unfortunately, they weren't able to fix the car for Saturday. It was Nick Percat whose car caught on fire on Friday. And they were able to fix his car, luckily, so he could compete in the race. But they were, it was a big fireball. And then obviously on Sunday during the Formula One race, we had poor old George on fire. And I felt so much for George over the weekend, because he just, I know that he has a long way to go and people think he's annoying, because he does complain a fair bit on the radio. Sorry, George, but you do. But all the drivers do. It's not like he's the only one. But yeah, it was an interesting race, to say the least. We now have the record for the most red flags. And we're going to talk about the restart and the last red flag in a moment. We're going to talk about the rest of the race first. I don't know if I can bring myself to talk about it either, because it was just, it was just, guys, like, come on, can we get our shit together, please? Charles Leclerc didn't even make it through the first lap. And, you know, as a Charles Leclerc fan, sitting there with my head in my hands, just screaming no at the top of my voice in my grandstand seat, as were about 25 other people in my vicinity, you don't want to see that. Like, you want to see drivers finish the race. And sometimes it just doesn't happen, and it's really unfortunate. And it was awful. Like, it was so awful. I feel so guilty. Because, yeah, I feel like I jinxed him. Then during the race there was a lot of tit for tat between Lando Norris and Nico Hülkenberg, which is so good to see. It's good to see because it's a veteran, and it's like Lando's not a rookie anymore, but it's a veteran and it's a younger guy. Sorry, my phone alarm's going off. It's a veteran and a younger guy competing against each other, and they were at it the whole race, which again, it was also really nice to see because the McLarens had a great weekend in Australia. I don't know what it is about Australia and McLaren, but there's something about Australia and McLaren that just means that they go well together, because last year we saw Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris get their first points. Both of them scored in Australia. And it was the first race that they'd performed extremely well at. So I don't know what it is about Australia that makes the McLarens do well, but they seem to do well. Piastri, for his first home race in Australia, I can't even imagine the pressure that you would be under, it being both your first race and your hometown. Like, because the Australian Grand Prix is held at Albert Park Lake in Albert Park, and Oscar is from Brighton, which is not too far from there. So it kind of was like a hometown race for him. And he's the only Australian driver whose hometown is in Melbourne and has gotten to drive in Melbourne. Even though Mark Webber is Australian, his first race was not in front of his home crowd. Danny Ricciardo's from Perth. so it wasn't his first home crowd. And who's the other Australian? Is it Nigel Mansell? I could be wrong. My brain's just gone. I should have researched this. But he was the first Australian driver from Melbourne to perform in Melbourne, to drive in Melbourne. And he did really well. I think the amount of pressure that he would have been under that weekend. And if you guys saw it on Instagram, his nana, his grandma made like snacks for the McLaren team, which is so damn cute. That's like the sweetest thing ever. And it's typical like Australian thing to do, to make like snacks and stuff. Who else had good races? It's kind of hard to say who had good races with the way that it kind of ended. It was a damn shame, such a shame about Sainz's penalty. Because it would have been nice to see Ferrari on the podium, because he should have been there. He should have been on the podium. I'm sorry, Carlos. But alas, it was not to be. Hopefully in Baku, both of the boys are on form and Charles actually gets to finish a race. But he was not the only one. He was not the only one that did not finish the race in Australia. There were 6 drivers who DNF'd. Charles Leclerc and Alex Albon, theirs happened relatively early on. There's some great evasive driving from Nico Hulkenberg when Alex went off and had his crash, because Nico was kind of driving through the smoke of the aftermath of that and did very well to avoid hitting him. I think Pierre Gasly was just behind him as well. So there's that. So there was Leclerc quite early, there was Albon quite early, and then there was George Russell. And I was devastated for George. You know, he deserved so much better. Like, he was up in the points. I think he was up in third. And he had so much potential to, finish the race on the podium. And then, there was that first red flag, which screwed him because he'd already had his pit stop and there was no point pitting him again for new tyres, because they'd literally done it, like, I think it was the lap before the red flag was called. Might have been 2 laps before the red flag was called. And then for his car to kind of just combust on itself and be shooting fire out of the back of it. It's a Formula 1 car, not a rocket, although sometimes they can be confused for the same thing. And yeah, so there was that. And then there was Kevin Magnussen's tyre deciding to just yeet itself off his car and just be like, no, I'm done. I don't want to be attached to the car anymore. Bye, guys. It was funny from our point of view watching it. Definitely not funny from Haas's point of view. But, hopefully it doesn't happen again. It's not very often that you see a Formula 1 car without its tyre attached and having to pull over. And obviously that is what triggered that final, that second to last red flag. That's what triggered that second to last red flag. Look, I am firmly of the belief that they didn't do what they did. The FIA didn't do what they did for the entertainment value. I know a lot of people have said that. There've been a lot of people that have disagreed with that. I know Martin Brundle came out and kind of said something about it. I think Ted Kravitz said something about it as well. Sometimes a standing start is a good idea. Sometimes a standing start is not a good idea. Like, you wouldn't do a standing restart with 4 laps. Was it 4? I think it was 4 laps to go. Or maybe 3 laps to go. 2 laps to go. Is it 2? Might have been 2 laps with 2 laps to go. You wouldn't do a rolling start with 2 laps to go in the wet, because there's just too much potential for so many things to go wrong. Unfortunately, so many things did go wrong in the restart. And, yeah, it's just, how did it even happen the way that it did? So this is where Sainz picked up his penalty, because he was blamed for crashing into Alonso, which that crash was very, very similar to Leclerc and, funnily enough, the other Aston Martin, Lance Stroll, at the start of the race. And Lance was not penalised for that. It was agreed that it was a racing incident. So I don't agree with the penalty that Carlos was given, because it was kind of a racing incident. I know he kind of chain reactioned it and sort of started it. But Fernando's car wasn't damaged. Like, he was able to drive that car back to the pits. Like, it was fine. It wasn't an issue. It didn't matter. And then there was Logan Sargent and Nick DeVries just yeeting themselves off the track. Just, bye guys. Bye. Just yeet. We're out of here, guys. I don't know. I've seen the replay and I still don't understand what happened. And then there's obviously the very, very unfortunate issue, which is like the French Civil War between Pierre and Esteban Ocon. And look, I've seen the footage. I know that they've both said that they just didn't see each other, which is completely viable. Like, I think that's genuine. They just didn't see each other and took each other out. And if you go back and you look at it, it's literally just like a copy and paste of the way that they both finished. And then obviously they red flagged the race, did the last lap behind the safety car, which, look, I think they should have wound it completely back and just not included that lap, because it didn't even happen before they finished a sector. And I know that when that sort of thing happens, that's when they went back to the grid positions that they were in, which again, as a Nico Hülkenberg fan, that was really upsetting because he was in fourth. Would have finished fourth, and then with Carlos's penalty, he would have finished on the podium. I love Carlos as well, but I would have loved to have seen Nico on the podium. However, we did have to have Fernando on the podium because that's where he was before everything happened. And he did manage to get his Aston back to the garage after that accident. So it's not like the car wasn't able to still drive. Like, he was able to still drive it back to the pits. I personally think they should have just ignored that lap completely and just done a lap behind the safety car and then had a last lap of the race. However, you can't just add and take away laps of a race for the entertainment value. That's where I think you could say that the FIA was trying to create more entertainment if that's what they had done. If they had ignored lap 57 and just gone out there, done the rolling start behind the safety car for lap 57 and then let them race for lap 58. Obviously that red flag as well upset Max quite a bit, which again is fair enough. I get it. He was like 10 seconds ahead of the Mercedes. Like, Hamilton had no chance of catching him. It was, I don't know what they have going on at Red Bull. I don't know what Adrian Newey is doing, but it was fast. That Red Bull was fast. There's a reason why he was going to finish 10 seconds ahead of everybody else. Despite that, Perez still got the fastest lap of the race and driver of the day, which again, fair enough. He started way back in the field and managed to pick his way through and finish fifth. We had both the McLarens in the points, which we only had both the McLarens in the points because the Alpines taking each other out. Oscar was 11th before that happened, so he was very lucky. But I'm very happy for him. It's great to see an Australian do well at the Australian Grand Prix because that doesn't happen a lot. We had Daniel Ricciardo do really well at the Australian Grand Prix a few years ago, and then they took the podium away from him. I don't really remember much about Mark Webber's career at Red Bull. Sorry, Mark Webber. I'm not your biggest fan anyway because you're Oscar Piastri's agent, which is great for Oscar Piastri because it means that he's getting opportunities, but it's, I love Daniel Ricciardo more than I love Mark Webber, even though Mark Webber was driving when I started watching, well, not when I started watching races, but when I, growing up, he was kind of the Aussie that was there before Daniel Ricciardo came along. And props to him. Props to Oscar Piastri for performing well in Australia. But yeah, there's so much that we could say about the end of that race and the red flags. Like, it's going to go down in history as the race with the most red flags. Like, which, personally, I don't think that's kind of something that you want to be able to brag about. Oh yeah, I come from the place that had the most red flags. And I think this race is one that people aren't going to forget quickly because of just the way that it ended. But shit happens, right? And yeah, so that's the end of the first video episode of the podcast, guys. Do we call it a vodcast now, or is it still a podcast? I don't know. That is the end of the first episode. That is it from me for this week. If you guys want to follow me on socials, you can. I am at Kelsey_139 on Twitter. My Instagram handle is Kelsey_loves coffee. It's very accurate for me. And I believe my TikTok name is Little Rocking Emo. Little Rockin' Rockin' Emo EMO. I will put all my links in the description anyway. And you guys can follow me. If you guys have questions that you want to ask, you can email them to me at thegirlonthegrid@gmail.com. I can't change the Gmail address now that I've changed the name of the podcast, but that's fine. If you have questions, you can email me there, or you can send them to me on Twitter or TikTok. I will try and follow people that follow me. I will try and follow you back. Please forgive me if I don't get around to everybody. Look at me talking like people are actually going to follow me. Anyway, feel free to follow me. Feel free to interact with me. I've had a really good time doing this as a video podcast. I'm sorry about my low budget background. I promise I will try and make my low budget background better for next time. The next time you see me will be after Baku, provided I don't get sick. I really don't want to get sick. And I will be back after Baku, and we can talk about we'll talk about the race, and I'll find something else during the week to talk about that I think is interesting, and I can share it with you guys. Hopefully I do get some questions and I can answer those questions. I do love interacting with people and having discussions, and hopefully I might be able to get a guest on to talk through Baku with me as well. I just have to finalize a couple of things. But anyway, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Bye! I just wanted to do a really quick shout out as well to my editor, Trent Cornell, and to Mr. Aaron Bateman, who is the lovely man that recorded my intro and my outro for me. So thank you to both of you guys. You mean the world to me. I'm so glad I have you guys as my friends. Catch ya.